Okay, good morning. Today I'm going to be talking about async and await. So async and await are syntactic sugar to make your code more readable when you're working with promises. And to understand why they're useful, you need to understand some fundamentals of JavaScript and, for instance, callbacks and promises. So I'm going to quickly cover those first. Oops. How do I go down? Oh, there we go. Okay, so JavaScript is single-threaded, which means it can only execute one block of code at a time. It's got a single call stack. So what happens when you're running code that takes a really long time is that it will block the running of the code. And we don't want that to happen. So, for instance, if someone's on a website and you've got a long block of code running, you don't want your program to stall because then the user can't use the website. We don't want that. So we run code which takes a long time asynchronously. So some code that takes a long time to run would be AJAX requests, querying data from a database, accessing file system with Node.js. So how does JavaScript deal with the problem? So for the longer pieces of code, it will run those longer pieces of code on a separate thread, like a web API, for example. Okay, so when you're running some asynchronous code, for example, you're getting some data from a database, information from a server, and you're getting back a result, a callback will let you know that you've received a result, and it will do something with that result when you receive it. So an example of a callback function would be set timeout. So set timeout takes a callback and the time. So you could run. You would run. So quite confusingly, set timeout takes a function argument first and then the time, even though it's going to run the time, and then once that's completed, it's going to run the function. So if we run this function, it will log hi after 2 seconds. But this isn't the best example for callbacks because it's not the best way to explain it. If you wanted to, for example, download a photo, you would first get the photo, download the photo, which take a while. Once that's done, then the callback will do something with the photo. And so that would make a little bit more sense to explain how callbacks work. I'll go back. Okay. Right, so if you're retrieving information using a callback, and then you need to use that information to make another request to a server, and you're doing that multiple times, it might end up in something like this, which is callback hell. And you don't want this in your code. It's very unreadable. It looks really bad. So in order to avoid this, we've got promises, which are a more elegant way to deal with asynchronous data. So what are promises? A promise is an object that's immediately returned that can have a proxy value. It's a promise to supply value in the future. So it can have a pending state until the function is resolved or rejected. And it will become fulfilled with a value or it will be rejected with a reason. And it wraps the asynchronous function and lets us know when it's done. So this allows asynchronous methods to behave more synchronously. So let me give you an example of a promise. So if we had what we had before, So I'm going to wrap this in another function called double after 2 seconds. Okay, so a promise, you'll need to wrap it around your function, your asynchronous function. So we're going to go return new promise. And we're going to put our function inside of the other function. It's a bit confusing now. One second.
You just need to put the parentheses back and delete number 7.
That one?
No. Well. Yeah. So this is a classic problem. Look, it's very easy to solve with the correct indentation, because indentation is wrong. Elegance, right? It's more difficult to solve. If you indent it a bit. Yeah. Yeah. That was more or less correct. Yes.
This doesn't need to be like that?
No. It's a closing function, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we run that. Right, so what do you expect to get when we run that? Does anyone know? Pardon?
When you hook the function, you have to pass the some number, not
Some number, oh yeah, okay. No, okay. So first you get a promise that's pending, and after 2 seconds the promise will resolve and produce the value. So there you go, the promise is resolved and it's got the value 20. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so transform it into something that we can actually use. So there, we'll print out the result. Okay, so async. So async is a keyword that's placed in front of a function to let JavaScript or the program know that the function is going to be dealing with asynchronous operations. And any async function returns a promise. So even if your function doesn't return a promise, it will wrap it in a promise. So I'll give you an example. So I'm going to comment this out for a second. So this function without the async will just return 1, as you'd expect. But with the async in front of it, it's going to return a promise. This promise is already resolved because this doesn't take any time at all. But with an async function in there, that would take time, so the promise wouldn't be resolved immediately. So await. Await is a keyword that's used inside of async functions, and the await is telling the program that the function needs to resolve the promise or reject the promise before it continues. And there are 3 rules to using await. So firstly, await must be used inside of a function that has async in front of it. It must be used in front of a function which returns a promise, and it must be associated with functions that all require the result of each other. So for example, I'm going to use what I used before. I'm going to make a new function called double async. So without the async keyword, so without the async keyword, you can see that it's returned a promise, but the value hasn't been given to it because it hasn't waited for the promise to resolve. So in order for it to wait for the promise to resolve, you put await in front of the function, and now when you run it, it should have the promise resolved. Why is it not resolved? Oh, there you go. So you get things together. So it takes 4 seconds. So after 4 seconds, it's giving the answer of 40, because first you're timesing 10 by 2 to give 20, then you're waiting for the answer, timesing that by 2, and that's then giving 40.
Megan, so if you visit a couple of breakpoints on line number 13 and 14 to see how we are effectively waiting, and even 15, right, to see, yeah?
Okay.
So that runs straight away, but then it will take, breakpoint on 14 was removed, unfortunately.
Oh.
There's a con thing, right? Sometimes it doesn't work. Anyway, you'll see that it will wait, it will effectively wait for, if it stops on 15, how long will it take to stop on 15, guys? 4 seconds, correct. So
2 seconds for 14.
correct.
2 seconds.
2 seconds for 15.
No, not really. 2 seconds on 13 and 2 seconds on 14.
Okay.
Yeah? So 15, you 4, yeah, more or less.
Okay, so we're still getting a promise as a result of this, so we'd still need to chain this with .then to use the value that the promise is returning.
I think you need to kill that. Let's remove the breakpoints slowly first. Now close that tab
Just have
on top. Close
this.
that one, correct. Now try again. You need to probably to run it again, and it will fail again. No, it works now. Okay.
So there you go, it prints out 40 after 4 seconds. And you can chain dot then, dot then, dot then. You can also do some error handling inside of here, but I haven't really covered that. Yeah, so that's it.
Can we use return instead of console log? Then, or just nothing like this console log?
Well, if you would use return, no, actually you need curly brackets,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Or remove return, because if you remove return,
Yeah, just without return.
yeah, what's return? Okay, fair enough. But even if we do that, it's a bit strange, because we are returning the result of a promise to who. So, yeah. I got a question for Megan. What happened if instead of resolving the promise on line number 6, you reject?
Reject. And it's just going to throw an error.
Well, yeah. You need to have the reject function, right? The promise. Yeah.
Because reject is used in promise for when something's gone wrong.
Can
So
we-
if you're using reject, then it means that something has gone wrong, so then it will throw an error.
Can we actually capture the error?
Yes. I think you have to.
Yeah, what Daniel suggested. Use catch, right? On number 19.
18, you mean?
18, correct.
Like that?
Yeah, but this is, let's do something, right, with catch. Then you pass a result as well, or error, and then do a console log. You see, now it's not failing anymore. Can you try again cleaning the console, because at the moment it's a bit confusing. And can you, okay, let's do that right. Can you do, for every, yeah, and instead of result, can you say like success, comma, result, something like that, just to, you know, and then, yeah, correct, comma, result, after the, no, after, yeah, well, okay, fair enough, yeah, that thing. And the same thing on the error, just to make sure that we're dealing with the right, you see? So with async await, so await will essentially capture whatever the promise returns, right? If the promise is successfully resolved, it will capture the value. If the promise is rejected, like in the case, that's fine, that's transparent. That's why this API is so beautiful, it's so sexy, because it's a way to easily transform callback hell, like Megan, the picture she showed before, into something more readable, if you want, right? Because even though under the hood, line number 13 will take a while, 2 seconds, and line number 14 will take 2 seconds, from a human point of view, it's much easier to sequence, right? You remember when we talk about breakpoints, right? If you don't have to do that, but if you add a breakpoint on, I don't know, just a function a plus b return a plus b plus c, if the code is synchronous, for you it's very easy to determine the order. But whenever the code is asynchronous with callback functions, you struggle a bit more. Yeah? So that's why this is so beneficial, because that helps you to understand how the execution flow works in that aspect.
I haven't got anything more.
Say again?
I haven't got anything more.
Anything else from Megan? No means everybody understood that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So then that was it. Thank you very much, Megan.